12 women, 12 perfect profiles, 12 failed connections. Russell Griffin, a guarded millionaire raising his son alone, thought love could be measured with dinner, questions, and his son quietly rating every woman from behind his sketchbook. None scored higher than a 7. Until one rainy afternoon, a girl sat at the wrong table. She offered her cookie to the boy, and that was the first and only time he whispered, 10. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Russell Griffin, seated at his usual booth in the high-end cafe, he practically owned through investment chains, adjusted his cufflinks as the next woman approached. She was elegant, dressed in designer beige, hair sleek, smile polished. She greeted him with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of networking. As she sat across from him, she barely glanced at the boy next to him. Sasha didn't mind. He rarely spoke during these meetings. Instead, he opened his sketchbook and quietly drew while the grown-ups tried to impress his father. Today, he sketched a dragon curled around a tall glass of sparkling water. The woman spoke about her achievements, her love of yoga, her recent trip to Tuscany, and the charity gala she hosted for exotic birds. Russell nodded, asked the right questions, laughed on cue. The kind of date most people would envy, but he watched Sasha more than the woman. His son didn't look up once. After 20 minutes, the woman excused herself to answer a call. As soon as she was out of earshot, Russell leaned toward Sasha. "What's the number?" Sasha shrugged. 4. She didn't even say hi. Russell exhaled through his nose. That made it the 12th date. And the 12th fail. He wasn't sure when it started. Maybe after the 5th woman who seemed more interested in the mansion than the man. But at some point, Russell realized that the only judgment he trusted anymore came from the kid sitting beside him. Sasha wasn't dazzled by charm. He didn't care about heels or handbags. He just knew when someone was real. He tapped a message to his assistant. "No more ratings this week. Tell the agency to hold off." Sasha grinned without looking up. "Tired of auditions?" Russell chuckled under his breath. "You're harsher than any critic I've met." Sasha flipped the page in his sketchbook and began a new drawing. This one was of a castle, crooked, whimsical, surrounded by crooked trees. "They just don't see me," he said simply. It wasn't bitterness, just honesty. Russell watched him for a moment. That soft twinge in his chest, the one that always came when Sasha said something far too wise for 9 years old, made him reach for his coffee. Before he could take a sip, his phone buzzed again. A scheduling error. The next date was accidentally pushed up by 30 minutes, and the table hadn't been cleared. Before Russell could respond, a voice interrupted. "Hi. Sorry, I think this is my table?" A young woman stood at the edge of the booth, slightly out of breath, holding a paper bag in one hand and a phone in the other. Her hair was loosely pulled back, and she wore a second-hand navy coat with a button missing. Her eyes, hazel and wide, darted between Russell and Sasha. "I was told table 7?" she asked, hesitating. Russell opened his mouth to explain, but Sasha beat him to it. "Sure," the boy said, scooting over. "You can sit here." The woman blinked, surprised, but smiled gratefully. "Thanks, kid." She slid into the booth, brushing a bit of lint from her coat. "Hope I'm not intruding. My friend couldn't make it to lunch, but she said this was the best place for their lemon tart." Russell gave her a curious look. "You're not here for the date?" She furrowed her brow. "A date? Then her eyes widened. Oh, no. Gosh, no. I mean, not that I wouldn't, but no. I'm just here for dessert. Sasha giggled. Russell blinked. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to say. The woman reached into her paper bag. Actually, I have 2 cookies in here. One's chocolate chip, the other is something experimental I tried, orange and almond. Want to share? She held them out towards Sasha, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The boy stared at her. Slowly, he took the orange one. Thanks. No problem, dragon boy, she added, peeking at his sketchbook. Is that a sea dragon or a mountain dragon? Sasha looked stunned. It's a cave dragon. Nice. Best kind. All secrets and treasure. Russell watched, half in disbelief, half in fascination. The girl had no idea who he was. No performance. No makeup mask. She sat at the wrong table, shared a cookie, and treated his son like a person. They talked, not about investments or hobbies that sounded rehearsed, but about drawing, cartoons, and Sasha's theory that cave dragons were misunderstood creatures who just wanted peace. She introduced herself as Ada Linda, Ada for short, unless you hate nicknames, in which case you can call me the girl who stole your cookie booth. Sasha gave a small laugh and whispered to his father, She's cool. Russell smiled quietly. No makeup mask. No script. Just a girl with kind eyes and cookie crumbs on her sleeve. The real date walked in 10 minutes later, spotted them at the table, and left without a word. Russell saw her leave, considered calling out, but didn't. He turned back to the wrong girl. The one who didn't know this was a test. The one who hadn't tried to impress anyone. And for the first time in years, he didn't care if it was a mistake. Because Sasha leaned close and whispered, She's different. And that was new. Ada Linda didn't stay long. She never intended to. She'd promised her comic shop coworker she'd cover for an hour that evening, which meant she had exactly 20 minutes to savor a lemon tart, catch her breath, and pretend she wasn't juggling 2 jobs and a half-dozen unpaid bills. But somewhere between the first bite and Sasha's dramatic reenactment of his favorite comic book scene, complete with hand gestures and sound effects, she forgot to check the time. Russell sat quietly, more of a witness than a participant. He watched his son lean forward, actually engaged, actually laughing. It was subtle but noticeable. Sasha usually closed off during these meetups, retreating into his drawings. But now, he was animated, alive. So let me get this straight, Ada Linda said, raising a brow. The superhero finds out the villain is his long-lost twin sister, who thought he got the powers that should have been hers? Sasha nodded, eyes wide. But she's not actually bad. She's just hurt. Oh, Ada Linda whispered, tapping the side of her head. That's the best kind of villain. Conflicted, messy, and probably good at baking. Sasha tilted his head. Why baking? Because deep down, everyone wants a cookie, she said, and slid the second one across the table to him. Russell chuckled despite himself. She glanced over. You think I'm joking, but the best characters always have layers. Cookies are just sweet onions. That's a very specific metaphor, he replied, amused. Yeah, sorry. I work with comic nerds and art students all day. We speak in metaphors and caffeine. He smiled at that. What do you do, exactly? 2 jobs. Museum receptionist by day, comic shop cashier by evening. Glamorous, right? Russell leaned back slightly. Most women he'd met liked to gloss over the hard stuff. But this one was clear, direct, almost unapologetically so. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was just being. Do you like it? He asked. The museum job's a little quiet, but the comic shop. She glanced at Sasha. That's the fun part. It's like babysitting adults who argue about superheroes. Sasha grinned. I'd win those arguments. I don't doubt it, she said, raising her cookie like a toast. To misunderstood dragons and heroic villains. He tapped his own cookie gently against hers. Russell felt something tighten in his chest. Something warm. Adelinda turned back to him. So, what about you? He hesitated. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. He glanced down. A string of texts from his assistant, confused about the mix-up. The real date had already canceled. Someone from PR was asking if he wanted to attend a gala this weekend. He tapped his screen once and turned it face down. I'm in tech, he said vaguely. Run a few companies. Adelinda nodded. Let me guess. Something to do with apps. Not exactly, he replied. Good, she said. Apps are ruining people's ability to look each other in the eye. Russell laughed. You're very straightforward. She shrugged. I used to be awkward. Now I'm just blunt. Saves time. He stared at her for a moment, unsure why he felt at ease. Maybe it was her openness. Maybe it was how Sasha looked at her. Or maybe it was how she hadn't asked once about money, business, or luxury. To her, he was just a man who liked coffee and had a kid who drew dragons. Adelinda checked the time and winced. Shoot, I've gotta run. She stood quickly, brushing crumbs from her coat, and reached for her bag. Thank you, both of you. This was the nicest lunch crash I've ever had. Sasha looked disappointed. You're leaving. Gotta unlock the comic shop. Milo locked himself out again. She paused, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small pin. A tiny enamel dragon, blue with silver wings. Here, she said to Sasha. A gift for the cave dragon master. Sasha stared at it, speechless. Russell stood with her automatically. Do you want us to walk you? She smiled. I'm good. You've got a table to finish guarding. She gave Sasha a wink, nodded once to Russell, and turned to leave, navigating between tables with the same quiet, effortless grace she'd walked in with. Sasha held the pin tightly, then looked up. Can we find her again? Russell's brow furrowed. You really liked her? The boy hesitated, then whispered. She saw me. Not just you. Russell sat back down, his hands folded. No woman had ever passed the test. Some had smiled at Sasha. A few asked his name. But none had really seen him until now, and she hadn't even known there was a test. He picked up his phone and texted his assistant just 4 words. Find out her name. The screen glowed for a moment, then dimmed. Across the table, Sasha quietly stuck the dragon pin onto his backpack, and somewhere outside the cafe, Adelinda disappeared into the city, completely unaware that she'd just scored the only 10 out of 10 that ever mattered. The next morning, Russell stood at the window of his penthouse office, coffee untouched on the glass table behind him. Rain tapped softly against the pane. Across the room, his assistant, Miles, waited with a tablet in hand and eyebrows slightly raised. You wanted her name, Miles said, tapping the screen. It wasn't easy. She's not in any database tied to dating platforms. But she paid for a lemon tart with a loyalty card used at that comic shop in Lower Eastwood. Name's Adelinda Zacks, 29, works 2 jobs, lives in a shared apartment above a florist. Pretty normal life. Russell didn't move. She didn't know. No. Seems she just sat at the wrong table. Total accident. A pause. Miles cleared his throat. You want me to send flowers? A note? Arrange something discreet. Russell finally turned. No. I want to see her again. But not like this. Miles hesitated. You mean, not as you? I mean not as a man with a name she'd have to Google, Russell replied. I want to talk to her without the money, without the test. Just as a dad. Miles nodded slowly. Understood. Russell exhaled and looked out the window again. He wasn't used to feeling uncertain. Business was black and white, measurable. But something about that afternoon, the way Sasha had glowed, the ease of conversation, the lack of expectation in her voice, had stuck with him like a song he didn't know the words to, but couldn't stop humming. By evening, he found himself walking past the glowing front window of the comic shop in Lower Eastwood. A cardboard cutout of a superhero with too many abs stood by the door. Inside, shelves lined with colorful covers, miniature figurines, and a faded Signing Today poster. Behind the counter, Adelinda was bent over a box of new stock, her hair twisted up with a pencil. She was laughing with a coworker, then paused as she caught a glimpse of movement near the window. Russell stepped inside. A small bell chimed above him. She looked up, blinking. Oh, hey, you found us. Russell offered a soft smile. Had to return something. He held up a small, plastic-wrapped comic, the exact one Sasha had mentioned the other day. He said he'd been searching for this issue. Thought you'd appreciate being the hero who delivered it. Adelinda stepped closer and took the comic, flipping it gently. This is rare. Out of print for years. Russell nodded. That's what he said. She raised an eyebrow. So are you one of those parents who bribes their kid with comics to get through life? Is that a bad thing? He asked, smiling. She laughed. It's the only reason Milo still speaks to his dad. Russell leaned against the counter. You always this open with strangers? Only the ones who don't mind orange almond cookies, she quipped. There was a beat of silence. Comfortable. She tilted her head slightly. You didn't seem like someone who'd wander into a place like this. What kind of someone did I seem like? She shrugged. I don't know. Polished. Caffeinated. Like you belong to the kind of cafe where the scones have names. He chuckled. You're not wrong. I usually am, she said, but her smile stayed. You and your son. You have something special. Russell's expression softened. He's all I have. I lost his mother a few years ago. Since then, I've tried to protect him. Maybe too much. Adelinda nodded gently. He's a great kid. I like talking to him. I noticed. They stood there, two people surrounded by comic panels and plastic heroes, somehow stripped of everything but their words. Then her coworker called out from the back, needing help with boxes. I should go, she said, already moving. But thank you for this. Really. Russell stepped back. Would it be all right if we dropped by again? Maybe Sasha can show you more of his dragons. Her smile widened. I'd like that. And then she was gone, disappearing behind a stack of cardboard and laughter, while Russell stood with a strange warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Back at home, Sasha was waiting by the door. You saw her, the boy said, eyes wide. Russell nodded. She says you have good taste in dragons. Sasha grinned. She gave me a pin. That means she's part of the guild. Russell tilted his head. What guild? The people who get it guild, Sasha explained as if it were obvious. It's very exclusive. Russell sat beside him, heart heavy and light all at once. She didn't even know she was being tested, he said aloud. Sasha didn't answer. He just pulled something from under the couch. A folded piece of paper, creased at the edges. He held it out. Russell opened it. A drawing. 3 figures, hand-sketched in colored pencil. A boy, a man, and a woman with cookie crumbs on her sweater. Above them, a dragon with wide wings curled protectively. There was a title at the top, "The Girl Who Passed the Test." Russell stared at it for a long moment. "She's not like the others," Sasha whispered, "and I don't want her to disappear." Neither did he. But deep down, Russell knew. If she found out the truth, everything might fall apart, and the boy's first 10 might turn into the last goodbye. 2 days passed before Russell saw her again. Not for lack of trying. He'd circled the comic shop once, stood outside the museum where she worked once, even drafted a text to Miles that he never sent. Each time he pictured Adelinda's unfiltered laugh, the way she talked to Sasha like he mattered, and the quiet way she'd slipped into their world without asking for anything in return. And each time, he couldn't bring himself to ruin it by showing up with the truth. But fate had its own plans. It was Sasha's idea to visit the museum. She said she works at the front desk, he'd reminded nonchalantly, as if they just happened to be interested in ancient pottery and aviation models that day. Russell raised a brow. "You sure it's not weird to just show up?" Sasha smirked. "Dad, we're patrons of the arts now." So they went. No tie, no entourage. Just jeans, a quiet dad, and a boy with a dragon pin on his backpack and a folded sketch in his coat pocket. The museum was quiet, its halls bathed in warm golden light and echoes of hushed voices. The front desk was wrapped in polished oak and old brochures, and behind it, organizing name tags and maps, was Adelinda, hair braided this time, glasses low on her nose, wearing a cardigan with a tiny rip at the shoulder. When she saw them, she lit up instantly. "Well, if it isn't my favorite dragon duo." Sasha beamed and stepped forward. "We're here for the cookies." Adelinda leaned across the counter, mock serious. "Sir, this is a place of culture. No cookies allowed. Unless you bribe the receptionist." Russell smiled, the tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying slowly dissolving. "I brought something instead," Sasha said, pulling the folded paper from his coat. "It's a new drawing." She took it carefully, unfolding the corners like it was made of gold leaf. Her eyes scanned it, the trio beneath a soaring dragon, the way she'd been drawn holding a cookie in one hand and a sword in the other. "This is incredible," she murmured. "I made you a warrior," Sasha explained. "You're in the guild now, officially." She looked up, her eyes misting just a little. "I've never been part of a guild before." "You are now," he said. Russell stood slightly behind, watching, and for a moment he didn't feel like a test was running, or like he was protecting anything. He just felt lucky. Adelinda glanced between them. "I've got a 15-minute break in 10. Want to sneak into the planetarium and break the rules with me?" Sasha turned instantly to Russell. "Please." Russell nodded. "Lead the way." Inside the planetarium, lights dimmed and stars scattered across the ceiling. They sat on beanbags in the corner while artificial constellations crawled across the dome. Sasha lay between them, arms behind his head, narrating the galaxies like he owned them. And in the quiet between bursts of laughter and whispered facts about nebulae, Russell looked at Adelinda, and she was already looking at him. Not the way other women had looked. Not like she was calculating anything. She just looked. "Thank you," he said softly, For what? For making him laugh. She smiled, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear. That kid's a gem. Any woman would be lucky to have a moment with him. He hesitated. What about with me? Adelinda blinked, caught off guard. I mean, Russell added quickly, would you ever want to get coffee sometime? Like a real one. No dragons. No lemon tart. Just us. Adelinda tilted her head. Is this a dad-level coffee request? Russell nodded, almost shy. That's exactly what it is. She grinned. I'd like that. Back at home later that night, Russell tucked Sasha into bed. The boy had barely made it through brushing his teeth before sleep hit. As Russell adjusted the covers, Sasha mumbled, She likes us. She does. She's gonna find out soon, though, he added. Right? Russell paused. Yeah, she will. Sasha's voice was soft. You'll tell her the truth, right? About who you are. Russell didn't answer right away. I will, he finally whispered. But not because she needs to know what I own. Because she deserves to know me. Really know me. Sasha nodded, already drifting off. Good. She'll still like you. Russell turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a long moment. Outside the window, the city flickered like stars against glass. Somewhere across town, Adelinda was likely closing up the comic shop again, never knowing that the two boys she'd shared cookies and constellations with were about to change her entire world. And Russell, who'd once built walls around his heart and called them logic, was already beginning to understand what it felt like to let someone in without a test. The coffee date was simple. No suits, no limos, no private chefs. Just a park bench, 2 takeaway cups, and a donut they tore in half without thinking. Adelinda showed up in a denim jacket covered in tiny enamel pins. Planets, cats, a wizard with a crooked staff. Russell, in his softest hoodie and jeans that didn't cost more than a used car, looked like any other dad from the neighborhood. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like one. They didn't talk about work, not hers and definitely not his. They talked about Sasha, about the comics she grew up loving and how she'd always been the weird kid at school who ate lunch in the art room, about how she once wrote letters to a fictional superhero and genuinely believed he read them. Russell admitted quietly that after his wife died, he stopped believing people could love him for the right reasons. Adelinda didn't flinch. I think it's normal to build armor after something like that, she said. But even the best armor has cracks. That's where the real stuff gets through. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her like he hadn't seen her fully until right now. And still, he didn't tell her. Because part of him was afraid the second he said the words, I'm the Russell Griffin, the spell would break. She'd stop calling him Dragon Dad. She'd stop offering her last cookie. She'd stop treating Sasha like a friend and not like a CEO's son. And he wasn't ready to let go of the only real thing he'd found in years. But fate, again, didn't wait for him. The next night, Adelinda was invited to a private museum fundraiser. She almost declined. She didn't have anything fancy to wear, and events like those weren't her scene. But her supervisor begged her to attend. The board wanted younger faces in the crowd, and she could bring a +1. She chose Sasha, not Russell. Sasha, you'll be the coolest person there, she told him. And I want you to see the rare comic art they're unveiling. Russell, amused, helped Sasha into a button-up and blazer, smiling as the boy smoothed his hair. But his heart twisted when he realized the event wasn't just any fundraiser. It was his. He'd signed the donation papers, approved the sponsorship, would probably have his name splashed across a banner in the lobby. and he hadn't told her. He paced the penthouse after they left, poured himself a drink, didn't touch it. Half an hour later, his phone buzzed. It was a photo. Sasha standing beside a giant mural of superhero sketches, beaming. And behind him, in tall silver letters on the wall, Russell Griffin Family Foundation presents. Adelinda hadn't messaged. She hadn't called. But the silence was deafening. When Sasha returned home later, quiet and unusually pensive, he placed his dragon pin on the counter and looked up. "She saw your name," he said softly. Russell nodded. She didn't say anything in the car, but she looked, I don't know, like someone dropped a brick on her. Russell crouched down. "I should have told her." Sasha hesitated, then asked, "Do you think she feels tricked?" "I think," Russell whispered, "she probably feels tested and used, like she was a game." The next morning, he went to the comic shop. It was closed. A handwritten sign hung crooked on the door. "Back tomorrow. Maybe." So he walked, aimless, a man with everything, but feeling emptier than he had when he had nothing. By evening, he'd exhausted every version of what he could say. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt enough. Until he returned home and found Sasha at the dining table, folding something carefully. A comic, hand-drawn, titled in big blue letters, "The Girl Who Didn't Know It Was a Test." Inside were pages filled with sketches of their first meeting. The cookie, the planetarium, the guild pin, the bench in the park, and finally, a scene where the girl stood facing a dragon and a king, saying, "You should have told me. I liked you even before I knew you ruled a kingdom." Sasha handed it to him, quiet and serious. "She deserves this." Russell took the comic, heart in his throat. Later that night, in a quiet hallway lined with mailboxes and overgrown potted plants, he placed a small box at her door. No return label, just the comic inside, wrapped in craft paper. On the front, in Sasha's handwriting, "For the one who saw us first." And as he turned to leave, not expecting anything, not daring to hope, a door creaked open behind him. Adelinda stood barefoot in the hallway, hair messy, eyes red. "I read it," she said, voice raw. Russell turned. "I'm sorry. I don't care that you're rich," she said, "or famous, or own half the city." "Then what?" "I care that you let me believe we were real," she whispered. "When all along I was part of your system. I don't need perfect, but I do need honest." Russell stepped closer. "I didn't plan to lie. I just didn't want the truth to ruin the one real connection I've had in years." She looked down. "I liked you," she said, "before I knew, because you were a good dad, because you listened, because you let Sasha be exactly who he was." Russell swallowed hard. "Can I try again? Without the tests, without the mask, just me." A long pause. Then she opened the comic again, flipped to the last page. A new panel drawn in ink. The king kneeling before the girl and the dragon, holding out a crown. And in Sasha's handwriting, "Please come back. S." Adelinda exhaled. "I'll think about it," she whispered. And then the door closed. Not slammed, just closed. Russell stood alone in the hallway, the echo of her voice lingering longer than it should have. But something told him she wasn't gone. Not yet. The next few days felt hollow. The comic shop reopened, but Russell didn't go. He couldn't. Instead, he spent more time in Sasha's room than usual, helping him organize his sketchbooks, listening as the boy explained which dragon had what powers. But even Sasha's voice carried a quiet heaviness now, like he was holding something back. Russell didn't press. He knew what guilt looked like in a child's eyes, and he knew it was his fault. He wanted to call, to text, to knock, but he didn't. Instead, he waited. And then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, something appeared in his mailbox. It was a postcard, handwritten, simple. On one side, an old photograph of a comic shop from the 80s, faded and peeling at the corners. On the other, a single line. Still thinking, but I miss the dragon. There was no signature, but he knew. The next morning, he sat with Sasha at the kitchen counter over cereal and orange juice and asked, "If you were going to say sorry to someone without words, how would you do it?" Sasha blinked. Like, without speaking? Without explaining? Just showing. The boy tilted his head thoughtfully, then grinned. "I'd make them a comic." Russell smiled. "Already did that." "Then I'd make them a world," Sasha said. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere that felt like the place where everything started. Where no one's pretending." Russell paused, and something clicked. Later that day, with Miles' help, he pulled strings. Quiet ones. No press. No sponsors. Just one name, hers, on a private guest list. That evening, Adelinda arrived home and found another box at her door. Inside, a hand-drawn invitation, colored pencil, folded like a storybook. The title, "The Return of the Dragon." Below it, an address. No explanation. She stared at it for a long time. Then she put on her shoes. The address led her to a small, renovated building tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore. Unassuming from the outside, but warm light glowed from inside the windows. When she pushed the door open, she froze. It was a gallery, but not of paintings. It was filled with Sasha's drawings, pinned gently to cork boards and clothespin to twine. Pages of dragons and castles, caves and stars. Moments from their time together, the cookie, the bench, the planetarium. One wall was devoted entirely to a mural-sized sketch titled, "The Day the Girl Walked In by Mistake." There was soft music playing. No guests, no speech, just Russell and Sasha, standing quietly in the corner, waiting. Adelinda stepped in slowly, eyes wide. She turned in a full circle, then looked at them. "This is," she whispered. "All of this. You did this?" Sasha nodded. "We wanted to give you a story that was just ours. No tests, no secrets, just the truth." Russell stepped forward, hands trembling slightly. "You didn't know it was a test, and that's exactly why you passed it. But I failed, because I was still hiding." Adelinda's eyes shimmered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. "This gallery is temporary, but it doesn't have to be. I was thinking, maybe you could help us make it something real. Place for stories, for kids, for comics, for kindness." She stared at the key, then at Sasha, then back at him. "I don't want your money," she said softly. "I don't either," he replied. "I just want to build something that started with you, with a cookie, with a moment that didn't feel like a performance." Sasha walked up and handed her another folded page. A new sketch. This one was of 3 people, her, Russell, and Sasha, sitting on a rooftop beneath stars. The dragon hovered above, smiling. At the bottom, one sentence, "She stayed, even when she didn't have to." Adelinda exhaled shakily, then nodded. Just once. That was all they needed. They didn't rush forward. They didn't kiss. There was no dramatic orchestral swell. Just silence. and peace, and the beginning of something real. Later that night, the three of them sat on the gallery floor eating takeout dumplings from paper containers. No more ratings, no more pretending, just warmth, and the gentle hum of possibility in the air. A few weeks later, the gallery opened for real. It wasn't grand or flashy. No velvet ropes or champagne. Just a wide, sunlit room filled with handmade art and crooked shelves holding Sasha's favorite comics. Some well-loved, some still wrapped in plastic. Children sat cross-legged on beanbags, crayons in hand, drawing their own dragons and stars. One corner had a sign that read, "Welcome to the cave, where every kid has a voice." Adelinda stood behind the counter, greeting every child like a guest of honor. She wore her enamel pins like badges of courage, and Sasha had added a new one, a tiny dragon curled around a pencil. Russell, in jeans and a flannel shirt no one would expect from a millionaire, was assembling a display board titled, "The Story That Changed Everything." At the center of it was the first drawing Sasha had made of the three of them, now framed, with the date written in gold ink underneath. Parents came and went, donating old books, offering cookies, asking about art classes. But no one knew, no one needed to know, that the quiet man helping set up the juice stand was once the face of half the city's skyline. And for the first time in his life, Russell didn't want them to know. Because here, he wasn't the man with the bank account. He was the man who showed up, the one who listened, the one who stopped testing love and started living it. That evening, long after the last child had gone and the sun dipped behind the buildings, they stayed. Just the three of them. Sasha lay on a rug with a flashlight, reading aloud one of his own stories about a dragon who lost its fire, only to find it again in a girl who wasn't afraid of the dark. Russell watched him, then turned to Adelinda. She sat beside him, legs folded under her, eyes tired but content. "You ever think about how unlikely this all was?" he asked softly. She smiled. "Every day. I still remember the first thing you said to me," he said. "You thought I was stealing your table." "I was very protective of that tart," she teased. They laughed quietly. Then he added, "You gave him your cookie before you knew who I was." She looked at him, warm and unguarded. "Because he looked like he needed one." "I did too," he whispered. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sasha, still on the floor, piped up without looking up. "If this was a story, it would end now, with a kiss or a spell or a line like, 'And they all lived happily ever after.'" Russell grinned. "You don't think we get a real ending?" Sasha rolled over, resting his head on a pillow. "Nah, real stories don't end. They just get sequels." Adelinda leaned her head on Russell's shoulder. "Smart kid," she murmured. "The smartest," Russell replied. Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding inside a little storefront called the Cave. No cameras, no ratings, no secrets, just a man who stopped hiding, a boy who stopped watching from the sidelines, and a girl who, by sitting at the wrong table, found the right kind of love. And maybe, just maybe, that was better than any perfect score.